On August 16, 2023, a young woman was brought into one of the world's most prestigious medical institutions, the Mayo Clinic, in a critical state. Her internal organs were rapidly shutting down. Her body was dangerously dehydrated, and her temperature shifted erratically. Even with emergency interventions, physicians had difficulty stabilizing her. Unable to identify the reason for the sudden decline, Betty Bowman, an accomplished pharmacist, recognized for her commitment to health and wellness, was now struggling to survive. Her co-workers were stunned. Only a day earlier, she had been energetic and well, and now medical staff were urgently trying to save her life without knowing what they were facing. One after another, possible diagnoses were eliminated. Laboratory tests did not yield clear explanations, and her condition kept deteriorating. What could have led to such a sudden collapse in the health of a young, seemingly fit woman? As doctors searched for answers, they began to understand that the cause was not a natural disease. Betty Bowman was born in 1991 in Kansas. She was raised in a respectable, hardworking household that emphasized honesty, persistence, and caring for one another. From a young age, she showed determination, seriousness, and a strong work ethic in everything she did. She performed exceptionally well in school, especially in science, with a strong interest in biology and chemistry. After graduating high school, she enrolled in a university pharmacy program where she quickly set herself apart as one of the leading students. Unlike many classmates who focused mainly on memorizing material, Betty was genuinely intrigued by medical mechanisms, chemical substances, and how medications affect the human body. After completing her studies, she began her career first working in a pharmacy before obtaining a position at a medical facility. There, she rapidly earned the respect of her colleagues and built a reputation as a dedicated and highly knowledgeable professional. Connor Bowman was born in 1993. Also in Kansas, but his upbringing followed a different path. He possessed a self-centered and calculating personality, frequently manipulating others to get what he wanted. Unlike Betty, he did not adopt values of diligence and integrity. Instead, he concentrated on ways to gain the greatest reward with the least amount of effort. In school, he did not excel academically, but his charm and quick wit allowed him to handle challenging situations smoothly. Connor had a talent for impressing the right people and portraying himself favorably. He chose to pursue a career in pharmaceuticals and enrolled at the same university as Betty. However, his interest in medicine was notably different from that of his peers. While others were driven by a desire to help people, Connor viewed pharmacology from another perspective. One centered on influence and control over the human body. Later, he chose to further his education by entering a medical program, aiming for broader career prospects and increased professional standing. Betty and Connor met during their university studies. Despite clear differences in their personalities, they formed a relationship. Betty perceived him as intelligent and ambitious, while Connor understood that being with her could provide certain benefits. The couple married in May 2021. A few months afterward, Betty was offered a position at one of the most prestigious medical centers in the world, the Mayo Clinic. This opportunity required them to move to Minnesota. For Betty, it marked a significant advancement in her career. For Connor, however, it represented something different. He was now living in the shadow of his accomplished wife. At that time, he was still a student and all financial responsibilities rested on Betty. She paid their living expenses, covered his education costs, and managed their daily finances. Connor did not have a job, relying completely on his wife's support, and over time, he grew comfortable with the situation. As months went by, their relationship started to change. Betty became increasingly absorbed in her work, broadened her social network, and flourished professionally. Meanwhile, Connor, feeling dependent and pushed aside, became more and more dissatisfied with his role. On the surface, they appeared to be a successful couple. But beneath that image, tension was steadily increasing. Eventually, they agreed to establish specific boundaries in their marriage, deciding to move into an open relationship. However, there were strict rules. Emotional involvement with outside partners was prohibited, and any encounters were supposed to remain strictly physical. Over time, it became clear that this agreement had been violated. Betty began to suspect that Connor had formed more than a casual connection with someone else. When she finally discovered the truth, her doubts were confirmed. This was not merely a lapse in judgment. It was genuine affection. For Betty, that was the breaking point. She made it clear that she wanted a divorce. To her, it seemed like a reasonable choice, but for Connor, it meant giving up his comfortable way of life, financial stability, and the benefits that came with their marriage. He understood that after a divorce, he would be forced to begin again with growing debts, and no safety net. Divorce was not part of his plan. He saw a different option, one that would provide him not only freedom, but financial benefit as well. On August 10, 2023, Betty Bowman was at home in Rochester, Minnesota. She had invited a close friend over for the evening to catch up, unwind, and take a break from work. It had been some time since they had last seen each other, and they were both looking forward to spending time together. Connor was also at home, but he rarely participated in these kinds of get-togethers. He typically kept to himself, showed little interest in Betty's conversations with friends, and preferred to focus on his own activities. That day, however, he was behaving differently. At one point, seemingly out of the blue, Connor offered to make smoothies. This was unusual for Betty. He had never been interested in cooking, had never shown concern about what she ate, and had never done anything like this before. Household responsibilities usually fell on her, so this sudden gesture felt out of character. Connor went into the kitchen, collected the ingredients, and began preparing the drinks. Betty's friend, noticing his eagerness, was a bit surprised, but didn't think much of it. Betty also didn't question it. Although a small voice in the back of her mind told her that something felt off about his behavior. A few minutes later, he came back with 2 glasses. Betty took a sip and immediately noticed something wasn't right. The drink had a bitter, slightly salty aftertaste that felt strange. She frowned, confused by the odd flavor. Her friend, curious about the reaction, decided to try it as well. The taste was indeed unpleasant. The smoothie was ruined, but at that moment, no one thought to question what might have been in it. They simply set the glasses aside and continued on. Connor offered no explanation. He calmly observed their reactions without showing any emotion. He didn't suggest making another batch, didn't try to explain the strange taste, and showed no interest in the fact that the drink was undrinkable. Betty quickly brushed off the incident, assuming he had simply made a bad smoothie. But in reality, this was no accident. It was the first attempt, one that failed only because she hadn't finished the drink. Connor realized he had made an error. Next time, he needed to make sure it succeeded. On August 14, 2023, everything at the Bowman home in Rochester, Minnesota appeared normal. Betty came home late after a long day at work, feeling drained. She had spent hours in the lab discussing new pharmaceutical research with colleagues. All she wanted was to relax, eat a quick dinner, and get some rest. Connor knew this was a critical moment for him. His first attempt a few days earlier had not gone as planned. The amount had been too small and the taste too noticeable. He had noted his mistakes and was determined to be more careful this time. This time he had done his research. Throughout the day, he studied how the added substance would affect the body, calculating the exact amount needed to cause a severe reaction without immediate consequences. He waited for the perfect moment when Betty was tired and less likely to notice anything unusual. As soon as she stepped into the kitchen, he casually offered her a smoothie. It seemed natural enough considering he had already done this in recent days. He acted calm, giving her no reason to be suspicious. Betty took the glass, drank a few sips, and calmly finished the smoothie. This time, nothing about the taste seemed suspicious. Connor had carefully adjusted the ingredients, hiding any unusual flavors. That evening, Betty began to feel weak. A slight fatigue set in along with a mild headache. It didn't seem serious, so she didn't give it much thought. By the morning of August 15, her condition had gotten worse. She woke up with a pounding headache, nausea, and overwhelming exhaustion. Soon after, she began experiencing severe stomach problems. Her body was rapidly losing fluids, but every swallow of water set off another surge of sickness. By midday, her condition had only deteriorated further. Betty could barely rise from bed, feeling as if her body was weighed down. Her temperature had increased and her muscles were sore. By evening, her weakness had grown so severe that even walking to the bathroom became difficult. Her body was dangerously dehydrated and the bouts of sickness continued. Every attempt to eat caused her condition to worsen. On August 16, she realized she was no longer able to cope on her own. Her body was so drained that even making a simple phone call felt overwhelming. She contacted the Mayo Clinic and explained her symptoms. That same day, Betty Bowman was admitted to the hospital in critical condition. She was severely dehydrated. Her blood pressure was unstable and her temperature was elevated. Doctors immediately began a comprehensive evaluation, but the reason for her sudden and rapid decline remained unknown. Initial test results revealed serious complications affecting her internal organs. The most alarming finding was in her intestines. Scans showed areas of necrotic tissue, meaning parts of her digestive tract were no longer receiving sufficient oxygen and had begun to die. An emergency surgery was scheduled. During the operation, doctors removed the damaged section, but they were uncertain whether the process had already spread further. After surgery, she was placed in intensive care and connected to life-supporting equipment. But her condition continued to worsen. Within hours, her kidneys began to fail. She was placed on dialysis, but the decline did not stop. By August 18, her liver was also showing signs of distress. Tests revealed a sharp rise in liver enzymes, indicating toxic damage. The seriousness of Betty's condition left the medical team confused. She was a young, healthy woman with no history of chronic illness. There was no clear explanation for why her body was shutting down so quickly. During this period, Connor Bowman showed unusual persistence. He repeatedly told doctors that his wife supposedly suffered from a rare genetic condition known as HLH. This claim was odd, as HLH usually appears in early childhood, and Betty had never shown any symptoms of it. Doctors reviewed her medical records, but found no evidence of the condition. Despite this, Connor continued to insist that HLH was the cause of her critical state. Even more troubling, he was telling friends and family that Betty was dying from this disease, despite the fact that the medical team had made no such diagnosis. On August 19, Betty's condition became critical. Multiple organ failure had begun. Her heart, kidneys, and liver were no longer functioning properly. Fluid built up in her lungs, making it hard for her to breathe. Despite aggressive medical efforts, the outlook was grim. On August 20, 2023, at 2:50 p.m., Betty Bowman was officially pronounced dead. For the medical team, the cause of her death remained unclear. But her husband's behavior raised concerns. He did not demand answers, did not ask about possible causes, and did not push for further investigation. Instead, he behaved as though he had already known what was coming. Immediately after Betty's death, doctors raised the need for an autopsy. The circumstances surrounding her sudden decline were uncertain and standard. Medical procedure required a post-mortem examination. However, Connor strongly objected. He claimed that his wife had always insisted she did not want her body used for medical study. This statement raised eyebrows among the Mayo Clinic staff. Typically, families seek answers when a seemingly healthy person dies unexpectedly. Most push for additional testing and explanations. Connor, however, was firm that no autopsy should be performed and that no one should investigate further. Law enforcement officers who became involved in the case found his behavior suspicious. In addition to refusing an autopsy, he was unusually eager to arrange the funeral. Just hours after Betty's death, he filed paperwork for cremation. He wanted the process completed as quickly as possible, but doctors intervened. They were not convinced her death was due to natural causes and decided to place a hold on cremation until further investigation could take place. The following day, Connor began writing an obituary. This became yet another strange detail in the case. He failed to mention Betty's mother and sister, the two people closest to her. Instead, he listed only himself and their dog. It appeared as though he was intentionally minimizing Betty's family ties, almost as if he were trying to erase parts of her life. Within just 2 days, he began removing signs of her presence from their home. All photographs of Betty vanished. Her personal belongings were either boxed up or thrown away. Friends who visited noticed the house no longer felt like a place where a woman had recently lived. It was as though she had never been there at all. Around this time, Connor invited an acquaintance over for drinks. That person later admitted they had expected to find a grieving husband in distress. Instead, when they arrived, they found Connor appearing relaxed, even cheerful. Throughout the visit, he showed no signs of sadness, never spoke about what had happened, and did not seem like someone who had lost his wife only days earlier. A week later, Connor made it clear that he was moving on with his life. Another woman moved into the house, quickly, occupying the space Betty had lived in just weeks before. This shocked Betty's friends and family. His actions did more than raise questions. They suggested that Betty's death had not taken him by surprise. Just days after the funeral, Connor began openly talking about the life insurance payout he had received after his wife's death. The policy was valued at $500,000. He spoke about it casually without any sign of grief or remorse. There was no mention of wishing he could have his wife back instead of the money. Instead, it appeared he was satisfied with how things had turned out. Many people had known and respected Betty both professionally and personally. Those close to her expected her husband to be devastated, struggling to process the loss. Instead, he seemed calm. Some who overheard his conversations noted that he spoke about the insurance money as if it had resolved his financial problems, rather than marking the loss of his wife. Investigators examining the case took particular interest in Connor's financial situation. They soon discovered that he had been dealing with significant debt. During his years in school, he had accumulated large student loans that had continued to grow. His financial standing was unstable. Unlike Betty, who had a steady and well-paying job, Connor was financially dependent. He was still completing his medical training, and his residence salary was nowhere near enough to cover all their expenses. As investigators examined his behavior after Betty's death more closely, additional troubling details surfaced. Even before receiving the insurance payout, he had made no effort to secure extra income, nor did he appear worried about his financial future. This raised suspicion. If Betty's death had been unexpected, wouldn't he have been desperate for answers? Wouldn't he have questioned the doctors, demanded explanations, or pushed for further testing? Instead, he behaved as if he already understood what had happened, as though any deeper investigation would only cause problems for him. Ultimately, detectives concluded that his financial difficulties could have been a central motive behind the crime. Connor had a clear incentive to benefit from his wife's death. He stood to gain far more financially than he ever would have from a divorce. Those who knew Betty struggled to believe that someone so close to her could have planned such a cold and calculated act for money. Yet, Connor's behavior, his lack of emotion, and his financial troubles suggested that Betty's death was not accidental. Investigators obtained blood samples taken during Betty's hospitalization. When analyzed, they revealed a shocking finding. Her system contained an extremely high concentration of colchicine, a substance used in medical treatment, but deadly when taken in excess. Colchicine is rarely linked to intentional poisoning because it is difficult to obtain without professional access. Although commonly prescribed for gout, its toxic effects make it extremely dangerous if misused. The symptoms of overdose matched Betty's condition exactly. Initial nausea, stomach problems, and weakness, followed by organ failure, and intestinal necrosis. Once investigators had this information, they began examining who might have had access to the substance. Their investigation quickly led them to Connor Bowman. As someone with medical training, he had the knowledge necessary to use colchicine effectively. Even more alarming, he had previously worked at a poison control center where he studied the effects of toxic substances on the human body. This discovery became the first major indication that he might be connected to what had happened. Detectives began interviewing Betty's friends and family. Her close friend, who had been at her home on August 10, described the strange smoothie incident. She recalled that the drink tasted bitter and slightly salty, and when both of them tried it, they assumed it had simply gone bad. The woman also remembered a joke she had made at the time, suggesting that Connor might have put something in the drink. At the time, they laughed it off and did not take it seriously. Now, in hindsight, those words carried an entirely different Meaning. Investigators focused on this detail as it suggested that an attempt to poison Betty may have occurred even before her hospitalization. If the first dose had been too small, it was reasonable to assume Connor had tried again, increasing the amount. Betty's family members, including her mother and sister, shared that in the weeks before the tragedy, she had been seriously considering divorce. They recalled her saying she was unhappy in the marriage and was preparing to move forward with separation. All of the evidence pointed to the possibility that Betty's death was not a tragic accident but a carefully planned crime, with confirmation of a toxic substance in her system. Investigators worked to collect further proof. They obtained permission to search Connor's workspace at the Mayo Clinic, where he was completing his medical residency. A review of his work computer uncovered disturbing information. His browser history included searches that were impossible to overlook, such as lethal dose of culticine, how to conceal traces of poison, can police track search history, and how to erase Amazon purchase records. These searches became a critical part of the case. They showed that Connor had researched deadly dosages ahead of time and had actively sought ways to cover his tracks. Additionally, a review of Connor Bowman's online accounts revealed purchases of substances unrelated to his medical work. Among them were cocaine and sodium nitrate. Sodium nitrate was another troubling discovery. While commonly used in chemical and food industries, it can become toxic at certain levels. Investigators concluded that Connor had been experimenting with different compounds, searching for the most discreet way to harm his wife without attracting suspicion. On October 20, 2023, authorities issued a warrant for Connor Bowman's arrest. By then, the case against him was strong. Laboratory reports, search history from his work computer, and his suspicious behavior after Betty's death all formed a substantial body of evidence. His arrest occurred early in the morning at his home in Rochester, Minnesota. Officers arrived with a warrant and Bowman was taken into custody without resistance. He remained calm, showed no aggression, and made no attempt to defend himself. His lack of fear or panic stood out to investigators. The court set his bail at $2 million, but Bowman was unable to post the amount. His financial situation changed drastically after the arrest. His accounts were frozen and his assets became subject to further scrutiny. Without access to funds, he remained in custody while awaiting trial. Meanwhile, investigators continued to collect additional evidence to build a complete picture of the crime. They examined his communications, financial records, and interactions with colleagues and acquaintances to establish motives and uncover further incriminating details. Although the legal process was only beginning, one fact was already evident. Connor Bowman would not evade justice. After his arrest, Betty's family and friends demanded the maximum punishment. To them, there was no doubt that her death resulted from a carefully planned crime. They pushed for a life sentence, believing that someone capable of such a calculated act should never be free. Prosecutors worked relentlessly to strengthen the case, ensuring the evidence would leave no room for doubt. The trial had not yet begun, but the accumulated proof strongly pointed to Connor's guilt. For Betty's family, waiting for justice was agonizing. They struggled to accept that someone she had trusted, someone who had been part of her life for years, had ultimately betrayed her in the worst possible way. Her mother and sister recalled the conversations in which Betty had spoken about wanting a divorce. She had confided in them about her unhappiness and her desire to move on, never imagining it would end so tragically. Betty's friends also played an essential role. Many became witnesses in the case, providing testimony and key details that strengthened the investigation. They stood beside her family, demanding justice and ensuring the person responsible would be held accountable. As of now, Connor Bowman's trial has not yet occurred. Since his arrest on October 20, 2023, law enforcement continues to gather evidence and prepare for court proceedings. A trial date has not yet been scheduled. If you found this case fascinating, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We post crime case videos every night. Until next time, stay sharp, stay vigilant.